A fully equipped warship was built in a single day. This is the story of the Venetian Arsenal, a medieval factory that defied the limits of its time. By the end, you will understand the precise blueprint for industrial speed that shaped an empire. How did a city of canals master logistics so completely, and what hidden cost did this efficiency demand? What does it take to build something perfect, not in years, but in hours? The city itself was a vessel floating on a shallow, protected lagoon. Venice did not rise from fertile plains or defendable hills, but from 1,000 wooden pilings driven into mud and salt water. This was not a choice of aesthetic, but of pure survival. Every connection to the mainland, every shipment of grain, every trade good from the east arrived and departed by water. The sea was not a barrier for Venice. It was the only street, the only field, the only frontier. A Venetian historian of the era famously wrote that the sea was to his city what the plow was to the peasant. Their entire economy, their very sustenance, was harvested from the waterways. This created a mindset unlike any other in medieval Europe. While kings and emperors built castles and trained cavalry, the leaders of Venice thought in terms of harbors, currents, and hull designs. Their ambition was not to conquer territory, but to dominate the networks that connected territories. To secure those lifelines, they needed a fleet that was not just powerful, but readily available and constantly renewable. A single lost naval engagement could strangle the city, so from this geographical necessity, a singular focus was born. The state's highest priority became the creation and maintenance of naval power. This was not a department of government, it was the central nervous system of the Republic, and the physical heart of that system, the engine room of empire, would become a place called the Arsenal. This ambition took physical form in a place that began with a simple, practical name. The Arsenal, derived from an Arabic word for a workshop, started in the early 1200s as little more than a guarded collection of docks and storage sheds for the Republic's official galleys. It was a secure parking lot for the state's most valuable vehicles, but Venice's rivals were not sleeping. The Maritime Republic of Genoa, a fierce competitor for trade routes, posed a constant threat. Later, the rising power of the Ottoman Empire would loom on the eastern horizon, a vast land and sea power with ambitions of its own. To survive, Venice could not just maintain a fleet, it had to scale its ability to create one at a moment's notice. So the Arsenal began to grow, not by accident, but through a series of deliberate, state-funded expansions that unfolded over 3 centuries. It was a slow, relentless consumption of space. The original basin was deepened and widened. Neighboring plots of land were purchased, and canals were dug or redirected to be swallowed within new, towering brick walls. By the 15th century, the modest dockyard had become something unprecedented, a fortified industrial city within a city, covering nearly 100 acres of water and land. Its perimeter was defended by high crenellated walls and watchtowers, not just to keep spies out, but to protect the technological secrets within. One of the most significant additions was the Darsena Nuova, or New Basin, constructed in the 1300s. This was not merely another dock, it was a revolutionary concept, a massive rectangular pool of water entirely enclosed within the arsenal's walls. Here, completed ships could be fitted out, armed, and stocked in total secrecy and security, safe from prying eyes and sudden attacks. The physical evolution of the arsenal is a perfect map of Venice's strategic mind. Each new gate, each new workshop, each expanded basin was a direct response to a changing world, a brick-and-mortar answer to a geopolitical problem. This sprawling, interconnected layout, with raw materials flowing in one gate and finished warships rowing out another, created the foundational stage. The theater was built, but the real magic was in the performance that happened inside. Within those fortified walls, a new kind of logic took hold, one that would not be seen on such a scale again for centuries. The secret was not a single invention, but a radical rethinking of the entire process. They understood that to build a ship in a day, you could not start building the ship on that day. Every single component, from the massive keel to the smallest wooden peg, had to be waiting, ready, and identical. This was the birth of prefabrication, and it turned the arsenal into a clockwork city of specialized labor. Scattered throughout Venice were numerous private shipyards known as squirri. These were not competitors to the arsenal, but its vital first chapter. Under strict contracts and specifications set by the state, these smaller yards operated as dedicated parts factories. Their sole job was to produce standardized ship components in advance. Think of it like a medieval version of a modern auto parts network. One squirri might perfect the art of carving the curved ribs or frames that formed the skeleton of the galley. Another would focus solely on producing the long, straight planks for the hull, each one cut to a precise, repeatable shape. Yet another workshop, run by the Sailmakers Guild, would have stacks of canvas already stitched and treated, folded and ready. Even the oars, thousands of them, were shaped and smoothed in advance, stored in vast racks like bundles of giant arrows. All of this pre-made material flowed constantly into the arsenal's warehouses. Walking through these storage areas would have been an astonishing experience. You would see forests of timber, not as raw logs, but as neatly sorted and labeled building blocks. Rows of identical ribs stood like the bones of giant sea creatures. Sails were bundled by size and type. Ropes, pulleys, rudders, and barrels of pitch were all stockpiled in meticulous order. This was an inventory system of breathtaking scale and precision, all managed without a single computer, relying on human memory, ledgers, and a culture of exacting standards. When the Senate issued an urgent order for new galleys, the arsenal did not swing into action to build them. It swung into action to assemble them. The pre-fabricated parts were pulled from storage and transported along the internal canals to the designated construction basins. Here, the true assembly line began. Teams of specialized workers, each masters of a single task, moved from ship frame to ship frame. One team fitted the pre-shaped ribs onto the keel. The next team fastened the pre-cut planks to the ribs. Another group installed the pre-assembled rowing benches and decking. It was a symphony of coordinated labor, where no one waited for the previous task to be completely finished across the entire basin before starting their own. While one ship was being planked, the one next to it might be receiving its mast, and the one behind it having its caulking applied. This method shattered the old, sequential model of shipbuilding, where you had to finish the hull completely before even thinking about the mast. At the arsenal, every stage happened in parallel across multiple vessels. The bottleneck of time was eliminated. The result was a staggering leap in speed. What traditionally took months in a conventional yard was compressed into weeks, and for that legendary single-day demonstration, into mere hours. This was not magic. It was the power of preparation and parallel processing, a logistical ballet performed on a watery stage, proving that efficiency itself could be the most formidable weapon a state could possess. But a machine, no matter how brilliantly designed, is nothing without its operators. The true power of the arsenal resided in its people, a unique social class known as the Arsenalotti. These were not ordinary laborers, they were a permanent professional workforce of master craftsmen, bound directly to the state. In a time of widespread uncertainty, they enjoyed remarkable privileges, a guaranteed salary, a pension for old age or injury, and a respected social standing that placed them firmly within Venice's intricate hierarchy. In return, they offered something the Republic valued above all: absolute loyalty and unwavering service. Their lives were a fusion of shipyard and barracks, making them the elite engineer sailors of the Venetian Empire. The work was organized into powerful, specialized guilds. A man did not simply work at the arsenal. He belonged to the guild of sawyers or caulkers or rope makers or blacksmiths. He spent his entire career perfecting one specific craft. A caulker, for instance, became an artist with oakum and hot pitch, knowing exactly how to hammer the fibrous material into the seams between planks to make the hull watertight. This deep specialization meant every task was performed with a speed and precision born of countless repetitions. A young boy entering the arsenal as an apprentice would learn not a broad trade, but a single, hyper-focused skill from masters who had themselves done it for decades. This created a living library of technical knowledge, passed down not in books, but in muscle memory and practiced hands. The result was a human assembly line of breathtaking coordination, where quality control was built into the very identity of each worker. Their role extended far beyond the shipyard walls. The Arsenalotti served as firefighters for the city and formed a dedicated militia, the personal guard of the Doge himself during state ceremonies. This dual role cemented their political importance. They were the armed protectors of the very government that employed them. It fostered an intense esprit de corps, a brotherhood built on shared skill, shared security, and shared purpose. They lived in neighborhoods surrounding the arsenal, their daily rhythms dictated by the sound of the marangona, the great bell of the campanile that called them to work. This closed, loyal community became the reliable human engine of the state's ambition. They were the living cogs in the clockwork, each one essential, each one turning in perfect unison not out of fear, but out of a vested interest in the machine's success. Their collective identity was the final, crucial ingredient, transforming a collection of advanced processes into a living, breathing system that could respond to a crisis with one unified will. And that system would face its ultimate test not in the calm of the lagoon, but in the fires of open war. The efficiency inside the walls was mirrored by a relentless flow arriving at its gates. For the assembly line to never stop, the stream of raw materials had to be as constant as the tide. Venice, a city built on wood floating in water, faced a fundamental paradox. Its lagoon held no forests, no mines, no fields of hemp. Every single component of its naval might had to be imported, secured, and stockpiled through a web of trade and treaties that stretched deep into the continent. The state did not leave this to chance or the whims of merchants. It managed the supply chain with the same strategic precision it applied to shipbuilding itself. Massive trunks of oak, the backbone of every galley, were floated down rivers from the dense forests of the mainland regions like Cadore and the Friuli. This timber was not used immediately. It was sunk into specially designed brackish water ponds within the arsenal, a process called seasoning, which preserved the wood and made it more resistant to rot and shipworms. For years, these great logs would soak, slowly becoming the perfect, durable building blocks of future fleets. Meanwhile, convoys brought other critical supplies. Hemp from the fertile plains around Bologna arrived in bales, destined for the cordery, the immense rope-making facility. This building, over 300 meters long, allowed teams of workers to walk backwards down its entire length, twisting hemp fibers into the massive, ship-sized cables that controlled sails and anchored galleys. From the Balkan regions came barrels of sticky, dark pitch, boiled from pine resin, essential for waterproofing the hulls. Iron from mines in the Alps was forged into nails, anchors, and weapons in the arsenal's own foundries. This was a just-in-time inventory system, centuries before the term existed. The goal was not to have a year's worth of materials sitting idle, but to have a predictable, rotating stock that matched the pace of construction. State-appointed officials, the Provveditory all'Arsenale, meticulously tracked every plank, every barrel of pitch, every coil of rope. They negotiated long-term contracts with suppliers, ensuring priority and stable prices. They managed the complex storage, knowing exactly where every seasoned timber was located in the sprawling basin. This logistical mastery meant that when the order came from the Senate, the arsenal's foremen never had to say they were waiting for supplies. The sheer scale of this operation transformed the arsenal from a shipyard into the logistical heart of a maritime empire. It was a perpetual motion machine of material conversion, where raw nature from a dozen different landscapes was systematically transformed into organized naval power. But even the most perfect machine requires a spark to set it in motion, and for Venice, that spark was often the thunder of distant war. This relentless flow of materials had one ultimate purpose: to give form to a machine of war perfected over centuries. The final product of the arsenal's clockwork system was the Galea Sotile, the light galley. To understand the one-day miracle, you must first understand the ship itself. It was a creature of speed and aggression, a predator built for the Mediterranean. Imagine a vessel roughly 40 meters long, yet so slender it was barely 5 meters across at its widest point. This elongated, knife-like profile was not for elegance but for physics. It was designed to cut through water with minimal resistance, propelled by a combination of human muscle and wind. Its primary engine was its rowing crew, between 150 and 200 men, seated in banks of 3 on a single, continuous deck. Above them, 1 or 2 large triangular lateen sails could be raised on a single mast to harness a favorable wind, but in battle or calm weather, the oars were everything. This was a vessel built for a very specific kind of combat: the rapid strike, the boarding action, the chase. It carried no heavy cannon below decks, as later sailing ships would. Its armament was relatively light, a few small forward-facing guns on the bow platform, and its main weapon was the men it carried, armed marines ready to leap onto an enemy deck. But the true brilliance of the light galley lay in how its very anatomy was optimized for speed in construction. Every curve and joint was designed not just to sail fast, but to be built fast. Let us dissect its skeleton. The process began with the keel, the backbone of the ship. This long, heavy timber was laid down in the building basin. Onto it, the pre-fabricated ribs or frames were secured. But here is where Venetian innovation truly shone. They often employed a method known as shell-first construction. Instead of building a complete internal skeleton and then attaching the skin, the shipwrights would first join the planks to each other, edge to edge, starting at the keel and working upward. These planks were not just simple boards. They were intricately carved and shaped in advance, with carefully cut notches and joints called mortise and tenon that locked them together like a 3-dimensional puzzle. Only after this outer shell began to take shape would the internal frames be inserted and fastened into place, reinforcing the hull from within. This reversed the traditional logic. Think of it like building a wooden barrel. You shape the staves or planks and hold them together with hoops. The frames are added for strength after the basic container exists. This method allowed for incredible flexibility and speed on the assembly line. Teams could be working on different sections of the hull simultaneously, knowing that every pre-cut plank would fit its neighbor perfectly. The armament, the mast, the rudder, the rowing benches, all of these were also standardized modules, pulled from inventory and installed in a predetermined order. The oars themselves were shipped in bundles, each one identical, ready to be slotted into the leather-lined oar ports. The result was a vessel that was essentially a kit, assembled from thousands of pre-made, interchangeable parts. The light galley was not a unique work of art. It was a mass-produced tool, and its standardized anatomy was the precise reason the arsenal could promise to build one between sunrise and sunset. It was a triumph of design for manufacturability, proving that the path to martial dominance was paved not just with courage, but with interchangeable parts and a perfectly timed workflow. The great bell of the Marangona tolls in the gray pre-dawn light, a signal not to begin, but to commence the final act. All the preparation, all the stockpiling, all the specialized training converges on this single day. Let us follow the sun across the sky and witness the clockwork procedure in motion. As the first sliver of light touches the lagoon, the keel is already laid. This massive backbone timber, pulled from the seasoning ponds and perfectly shaped, rests in a prepared dry dock, its alignment checked and rechecked. This is not the start of construction, it is the start of assembly. The first critical component is locked into place, the foundation upon which everything else will rise. By mid-morning, the skeletal form of the galley begins to emerge from the basin. Teams of carpenters working in synchronized units swarm the growing structure. From the organized chaos of the warehouses, prefabricated ribs are carried to the site. These curved frames, each identical to the last, are fitted onto the keel at precise intervals, creating the ship's ribcage. Simultaneously, another team begins attaching the pre-cut planks to this frame. There is no searching for a plank that fits, no last-minute shaping with an adze. Each plank, carefully numbered and stored, is lifted into position and fastened with pre-made wooden pegs and iron nails. The sound is a relentless percussion of mallets on wood, a rhythmic proof of preparation. While this is happening, other specialists are already at work inside the hull, installing the pre-assembled rowing benches, knowing exactly where they must go. When the sun reaches its zenith, the hull is no longer a skeleton but a sealed vessel. The caulkers move in, their task critical. They work with hot pitch and oakum, a hemp fiber soaked in tar. With skilled, swift motions, they hammer this sticky material into every seam between the planks. The smell of hot pine resin fills the air. This process, called paying, waterproofs the hull, turning a collection of wooden pieces into a single, watertight shell. There is no time for the pitch to cool and set slowly. The pace demands it be done right the first time, under the watchful eyes of guild masters who have performed this task 10,000 times. The afternoon sun slants through the high windows of the workshops as the galley receives its muscles and sinews. From the immense cordery, the rope walk, teams bring the rigging. The mast, a single, towering spar that has been waiting in storage, is stepped or lifted into its socket in the center of the hull. Ropes are run through pre-positioned blocks and pulleys, creating the network that will one day control the lateen sails. On the deck, other workers fit the long, slender oars into their leather-lined ports, each one sliding smoothly into place, a bundle of potential energy ready to be unleashed by human hands. The ship is no longer a static construction. It is beginning to look like a living thing poised for motion. As the sky blushes with the colors of sunset, the final, transformative moment arrives. The gates of the dry dock are opened and lagoon water floods in, lifting the galley from its wooden supports for the very first time. It floats. This simple fact is the ultimate test of the day's labor. There is no dramatic leak, no groan of misaligned timber. The vessel sits evenly in the water, a testament to perfect geometry and execution. In these last moments of daylight, the final touches are added. Barrels of water and biscuit are rolled aboard for the crew. Crates of arms, shields, and crossbows are stored. A detachment of Marines steps onto the deck, their presence marking the transition from a project to a weapon of the Republic. By the time the last light fades, what was an empty basin at dawn is now occupied by a fully equipped warship, its oars stacked, its sail furled, ready to answer the call of the Senate. The impossible feat is complete, not through magic, but through the meticulous choreography of an entire city's industrial will. That single-day miracle rested on a principle so simple, yet so revolutionary for its time, it became the invisible architecture of the entire operation. Every identical plank, every matching rib, every interchangeable oar was the result of a deliberate system called parti tagliotti, or cut parts. This was not just advanced carpentry, It was the medieval equivalent of mass production, and its secret weapon was the template. Master shipwrights did not measure each new piece of timber individually with a rule. Instead, they worked from full-scale wooden patterns, intricate outlines that dictated the exact shape of every single component in the galley. Think of these patterns as the cookie cutters of naval power. A worker would lay the pattern over a seasoned oak plank, trace its precise contours with chalk, and then cut. The result was a piece that was not merely similar to the last one, it was a perfect duplicate. This process was repeated for hundreds of parts, from the massive curved frames that formed the hull to the subtle angles of the deck supports. The genius of this system was its ruthless consistency. A rib carved in the spring would fit perfectly into a hull assembled in the autumn, because both were born from the same wooden template, stored and guarded within the arsenal's walls. This interchangeability transformed the shipyard. If a plank was damaged during the frantic assembly, there was no panic, no delay to custom carve a replacement. A worker simply went to the warehouse, pulled an identical plank from the designated stack, and slotted it into place. It was a repair system built into the very design of the ships. This drastically reduced waste as well, since every cut was predetermined and optimized, leaving little room for error or offcuts. But this level of precision did not happen by accident. It was enforced from the very top by the state, through the watchful eyes of the Provveditore all'Arsenale. These officials were more than just warehouse managers, they were the quality control enforcers of the Republic. They issued and updated the official taurida, the detailed design specifications that dictated everything. These regulations stipulated the exact dimensions for each class of ship, the type and quality of wood to be used for specific parts, the grade of hemp for ropes, and even the mixture for the waterproofing pitch. A private squarry owner contracted to produce 200 ribs, knew that if his products deviated from the state template by even a finger's width, his contract and possibly his livelihood could be forfeit. This enforced standardization achieved something beyond mere speed. It created a predictable, reliable tool of war. A captain taking command of a new galley knew exactly how it would handle. The rowing master knew the exact length and weight of every oar, allowing his crew to find their rhythm instantly. In the chaos of battle or during a long campaign, this consistency was a force multiplier. Repairs at sea or in distant ports became straightforward, because any Arsenal-built galley carried interchangeable parts with it, or could be mended with materials sourced from another Venetian vessel. The fleet did not consist of 100 unique works of art, each with its own quirks. It was 100 instruments from the same workshop, all tuned to the same pitch, all responding to the same command. This gave the Venetian Navy a tactical cohesion that was incredibly difficult for an adversary to match, turning logistical efficiency into a direct battlefield advantage. Yet for all its mechanical perfection, the Arsenal was not a cold, silent factory. It was a living ecosystem, and its human heart beat to a rhythm of loyalty, privilege, and occasional, thunderous dissent. The perfect harmony inside the Arsenal's walls was orchestrated by a single, unwavering conductor, the Venetian state itself. This was not a private business venture driven by quarterly profits. It was the ultimate expression of what we might now call state capitalism, a system where the government was the sole investor, the sole manager, and the only customer. The Arsenal existed for one purpose: to produce security and power for the Republic, and every other consideration was secondary. At the highest levels, the Senate and the feared Council of 10 did not merely fund the shipyard, they micromanaged its existence. They reviewed production reports, set annual output quotas, and issued decrees that could redirect the entire economy toward the Arsenal's needs. This absolute centralized control granted the facility something no private shipyard could ever dream of: the ability to think and invest in centuries, not just seasons. While a family-owned squarry had to worry about its next contract to stay afloat, the arsenal's budget was guaranteed by the full treasury of a maritime empire. This allowed for staggering capital investments, building the new basin, expanding the rope walk, purchasing entire forests. These were projects that would bankrupt a private individual, but were simply line items in the state's long-term security plan. The money flowed from a deliberate funnel of public finance. A portion of the lucrative customs duties from the trade flowing through the Rialto market was earmarked directly for the arsenal. Taxes on salt, a state monopoly, filled its coffers. Even the profits from certain overseas colonies were siphoned back to feed the industrial heart of the metropolis. This created a financial ecosystem entirely insulated from market competition. The arsenal did not have to underbid a rival to win a contract. It was the contract. Its mandate was not to be cost-effective in the short term, but to be overwhelmingly effective in perpetuity. This priority reshaped Venetian law and society. Decrees known as promiscione gave the arsenal the right of first refusal on all quality timber entering the lagoon, forcing private builders to wait for the state's needs to be met. Skilled craftsmen from across the region were offered incentives, even exemptions from certain taxes, to relocate to Venice and join the Arsenalotti. The state could and did commandeer private ships and their crews in times of emergency, seamlessly absorbing them into the Republican fleet. This model stands in stark contrast to the private enterprise we know today. There was no board of shareholders demanding dividends, only a Senate demanding dominance. Efficiency was measured not in gold coins saved, but in warships delivered and sea lanes secured. The result was an institution that could absorb losses, stockpile materials for years without immediate use, and experiment with new designs at state expense, all in the name of maintaining a strategic reserve of power that kept Venice independent for centuries. This single-minded focus, however, came with a hidden tension. The very state that empowered the arsenal also depended on it completely, creating a relationship of mutual vulnerability that would be tested not by a failure of production, but by a shift in the very nature of power itself. The efficiency of the Arsenalotti and their pre-cut parts was amplified by a stage built for speed. The physical layout of the arsenal itself was a masterclass in architectural innovation, a factory floor designed centuries before the Industrial Revolution to eliminate every possible delay. This was not a collection of buildings that happened to be near the water. It was a single, integrated machine made of brick, wood, and canal. The first genius lay in its covered docks. Unlike open shipyards where rain or winter storms could halt work for days, the arsenal featured long, vaulted structures called tazzoni. These great sheds, supported by rows of massive brick arches, sheltered multiple ships at once, allowing carpenters, caulkers, and riggers to work in parallel, uninterrupted by the weather. The most famous of these was the Tazzone Grande, a cavernous warehouse over 300 meters long. Within its dim, dusty interior, lit by shafts of light from high windows, the skeletons of several galleys could rise simultaneously, their ribs curving upward like the exposed anatomy of giant sea creatures, all under one immense roof. This meant that the critical early stages of hull assembly were never at the mercy of a cloudy sky or a sudden squall. But a ship built on land must eventually meet the sea, and here, the arsenal's engineers performed a kind of hydraulic magic. The building basins were equipped with ingenious sluice gate systems. When a hull was ready to be floated, workers could open channels to let lagoon water flood the basin, gently lifting the vessel from its supports. More impressively, they could also drain a basin just as quickly to inspect a hull's underside or begin a new construction cycle. This control over the element they depended on turned water from a passive environment into an active tool, saving weeks of labor compared to hauling ships on rollers. Connecting every stage of this process was a network of internal canals. These were the conveyor belts of the medieval age, a pre-fabricated mast finished in one workshop, could be loaded onto a flat-bottomed barge and poled directly to the ship awaiting its installation. Barrels of pitch from the foundry, bundles of oars from storage, and crates of weapons from the armory all moved on these liquid pathways, flowing smoothly from warehouse to assembly point without ever needing to be manhandled over cobblestones or through narrow streets. This seamless integration of land and water logistics meant that a component never waited for transport. It was already floating toward its destination. Every architectural choice, from the covered docks to the sluice gates to the capillary network of canals, served a single, ruthless purpose: to remove bottlenecks. The goal was to ensure that human labor, the most valuable and variable resource, was never idle. If a caulker finished his section, the next hull was just a few steps away, already prepped and waiting. If a ship was ready to be fitted out, a canal led straight to the arming docks. The arsenal's architecture created a perpetual, sheltered, optimized environment where the only thing that mattered was the relentless forward momentum of production. It was a physical manifestation of the Venetian mindset, where every obstacle was not just overcome but engineered into oblivion. This flawless system, however, did not exist in a vacuum. It was built to serve an empire, and empires inevitably face moments of ultimate crisis. The year was 1571, and the Mediterranean held its breath. For decades, the Ottoman Empire had been expanding its naval reach, turning the sea into a contested frontier. Now, a vast Ottoman fleet, hundreds of ships strong, was on the move, threatening Christian-held territories and the delicate balance of power. In response, a fragile alliance called the Holy League was hastily formed between Venice, Spain, the Papal States, and other Italian powers. Their survival depended on assembling a combined fleet powerful enough to meet the Ottoman Armada head-on. For Venice, this was an existential moment. The Republic's entire identity and wealth were woven into the sea lanes now under threat. The Senate knew the arsenal's reserves would be called upon like never before. It is against this backdrop of looming, monumental conflict that the legend of the one-day ship finds its most compelling home. As the story goes, with tensions at their peak, Venetian senators visited the arsenal and posed a direct, almost theatrical challenge to its master shipwrights. Could they truly demonstrate the speed they were famous for? Could they build a complete, battle-ready galley in the time between sunrise and sunset? The master of the arsenal is said to have bowed and accepted. By nightfall, a new warship was floated, equipped, and presented. While historians debate the literal truth of this single, perfect demonstration, the legend itself is a powerful symbol. It represents the absolute confidence Venice placed in its industrial heart, a confidence born not from magic, but from a system perpetually primed for this exact kind of crisis. The real pressure was not for a one-day spectacle, but for the sustained, rapid output of an entire fleet. The Holy League needed galleys, and it needed them immediately. Venice's contribution was pivotal, and it was the arsenal's standing capacity that made it possible. While other allies scrambled to commission and build new ships from scratch, Venice could draw from a deep well of pre-production. The warehouses stocked with parti tagliotti, the seasoned timber in the ponds, the regiments of specialized Arsenalotti, all of it was a strategic reserve that could be converted into naval power at astonishing speed. In the months leading to the climactic Battle of Lepanto, the arsenal was not performing a trick. It was executing a long-planned wartime protocol. Galleys were pulled from reserve and refurbished. New hulls rose in the covered docks in parallel lines. The rhythm of the mallet and the caulking iron became the drumbeat of mobilization. This ability to surge production allowed Venice to contribute over 100 galleys to the Holy League fleet, a decisive portion of the Allied force. When the two great armadas finally clashed in the Gulf of Patras on October 7, 1571, it was the largest naval battle in centuries. The Venetian galleys, products of that relentless efficiency, formed a critical part of the battle line. Their standardized design and interchangeable parts likely proved invaluable in the brutal, close-quarters combat that followed, where damaged ships needed quick, makeshift repairs to stay in the fight. The Holy League achieved a monumental victory that day, shattering Ottoman naval supremacy for a generation. While credit rightly goes to the courage of the sailors and soldiers, that courage required a platform. The ships that carried them into history were, in many ways, the ultimate product of the Arsenal's logic. The legend of the one-day ship, whether fully factual or not, captures the essence of that logic. It was the promise made real, the proof that in the face of an overwhelming crisis, Venice could summon a warship from its industrial soul with the same regularity as the rising tide. Yet the true scope of this industrial engine extended far beyond the wooden hulls of its galleys. The Venetian arsenal was not merely a shipyard, it was a self-contained universe of military production. To leave its gates and sail into battle, a galley needed more than a hull and oars. It needed teeth, it needed supplies, and it needed the explosive force to project power. Understanding this reveals the final layer of Venetian genius: vertical integration. Within those same fortified walls, the Republic built the industries that turned a floating platform into a complete weapon system. The journey of a cannon, for instance, began and ended inside the complex. Huge foundries, roaring with heat, smelted iron and bronze into the great guns that would be mounted on the bow of a galley. The casting process itself was a spectacle of controlled chaos, with molten metal flowing into intricate clay molds to create pieces of standardized caliber. Nearby, other workshops buzzed with the precise craft of the armorers. Here, artisans forged and assembled the personal weapons of war, crossbows with their complex mechanisms, racks of pikes and halberds for the Marines, and even the plate armor for officers. Every piece of metal that would be carried into battle could, in theory, be sourced, shaped, and finished without ever leaving the arsenal's secure perimeter. But the most volatile and perhaps most crucial product was gunpowder. The state could not risk relying on imported supplies of this strategic material. So, within a specially isolated section of the complex, often on its own island for safety, stood the gunpowder mill. Here, workers combined the three essential ingredients: sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter, grinding them together with immense water-powered stamp mills. This was dangerous, meticulous work, performed under strict regulations to prevent a single spark from causing catastrophe. The resulting coarse black powder was then packed into wooden barrels, ready to be rolled directly onto the waiting galleys. This vertical integration reached into the mundane necessities of a campaign as well. Vast warehouses stored not just timber and rope, but the provisions that would sustain a crew for months at sea. Mountains of hardtack biscuit sealed in barrels to stay dry, stacks of salted meat and fish, and casks of wine and water all represented another layer of strategic stockpiling. A fleet could be victualled from these stores, meaning that once a squadron of galleys was assembled and armed, it could also be fed from the same source. This transformed the timeline of mobilization. In a conventional system, a completed ship might wait weeks for its cannon to arrive from a separate foundry, then more days for its gunpowder to be delivered by a merchant, and still more for a government contractor to supply the biscuits. Each step introduced delay, negotiation, and potential failure. At the arsenal, these were not separate steps at all. They were concurrent stages in a single, fluid process. A galley floating in the new basin could have its cannons lowered onto its deck from the foundry's wharf, have barrels of powder rolled aboard from the mill's barge, and have its hold filled with food from the granary warehouses, all within the same afternoon. The arsenal was, in essence, a one-stop shop for naval power. It took scattered raw materials from across Europe and the Mediterranean, and through a series of interconnected, state-controlled processes, converted them directly into a battle-ready fleet. This condensation of the supply chain was the ultimate secret behind their legendary speed. It was not just about building a ship in a day, it was about creating an entire fighting unit, armed, supplied, and provisioned in a time frame that left their adversaries bewildered. The order from the Senate did not trigger a search for suppliers. It simply initiated the final assembly of components that were already waiting in various forms within the walls. This holistic approach meant Venetian power could be projected with a swiftness that felt almost supernatural to its rivals, a direct result of seeing industry not as a collection of trades, but as a single, living organism dedicated to survival. But the true power of the arsenal extended far beyond its walls, rippling outward to shape the very city it defended. This industrial fortress was not an isolated machine. It was the beating heart of a vast social and economic ecosystem. The thousands of Arsenalotti were not just employees, they were the bedrock of a stable, prosperous community. Their guaranteed salaries, paid regularly by the state, provided something rare in the medieval world: predictable income. This meant their families could plan, could invest, could build lives with a degree of security unknown to day laborers or seasonal farmers. That steady stream of wages flowed directly into the neighborhoods surrounding the arsenal, the parishes of Castello. Local shopkeepers, bakers, butchers, and tavern owners all depended on the daily commerce of these workers. The demand for housing transformed the area, with new homes and apartments rising to accommodate the growing workforce, their construction itself providing jobs for another layer of artisans. The arsenal did not just build ships, it built a thriving local economy from the ground up. Furthermore, the shipyard acted as a powerful social leveler. Within its guild structure, advancement was based on demonstrated skill and seniority, not noble birth. A talented apprentice caulker could rise through the ranks to become a foreman, a proto, respected for his mastery and entrusted with great responsibility. This meritocratic pathway offered a form of upward mobility that was incredibly valuable in a society with a rigid aristocratic class. The prestige of being an Arsenalotto, of wearing the distinctive cap that identified them as state workers, granted a social standing that bridged the gap between the common citizen and the ruling elite. Their role as the Doge's guard during ceremonies was a public, symbolic display of this trust, visually cementing their importance in the civic body. The arsenal provided not just a job, but an identity and a path to respect. This economic engine also reached deep into the Venetian mainland, the terra firma. The insatiable demand for raw materials created fortunes and sustained entire regions. The oak forests of Cadore were not just woodlands, they were a strategic resource industry. Landowners who controlled these tracts grew wealthy on long-term state contracts to supply timber. Peasants found work as loggers and raftsmen, floating the great trunks down rivers toward the lagoon. The plains around Bologna became a specialized hemp belt, their agricultural output dictated by the arsenal's need for rope. Mines in the Alps increased production to feed the foundry's hunger for iron. Even the trade in saltpeter for gunpowder created niche markets that stretched across Europe. A network of merchants, carters, and bargemen made their living solely by moving these materials along the supply routes that all converged on the arsenal's gates. This symbiotic relationship bound the mainland territories to the capital city in a tight economic embrace. Their prosperity was directly linked to the health of the arsenal, giving them a vested interest in the security of the Republic. The military-industrial complex, as we might term it today, was not a drain on the civilian economy. It was its primary driver and stabilizer. The wealth generated by trade in silks and spices was amplified and secured by the industrial spending on oak, iron, and hemp. This created a powerful cycle where commercial profit funded naval power, and naval power protected the trade routes that generated the profit. The arsenal was the crucial gear in this clockwork, transforming capital into security and security back into capital. It was a deeply woven thread in the social fabric, proving that the strength of a state could be measured not only in the warships it launched, but in the stable, skilled, and invested society it cultivated to build them. A persistent question shadows this story of incredible speed. Did it come at the cost of quality? It is a natural suspicion that something built so quickly must be flimsy, a temporary solution destined for failure. Yet the historical record and the logic of the system itself tells a very different story. The Arsenal's galleys were not slapdash constructions. They were renowned throughout the Mediterranean for their exceptional seaworthiness and remarkable durability. The secret is that speed was not achieved by rushing the final assembly, but by investing immense time and skill into the preparation. That legendary one-day ship was not a rushed job. It was the final, swift act in a performance that had been rehearsed for months. Every single component that was fitted together in those frantic hours had been crafted to perfection by master artisans in the preceding seasons. A rib shaped in a private squerry was not a rough approximation. It was a piece of art carved from well-seasoned oak by a carpenter whose family had likely been in the guild for generations. The quality was baked into every step long before the keel was laid. Standardization, far from creating mediocrity, enforced a remarkably high and consistent baseline of excellence. Because every part had to be interchangeable, every part had to meet the exact same rigorous standard. There was no room for the slightly warped plank or the almost correct joint. The state inspectors, the provveditori, would reject anything that deviated from the official template, ensuring that only the best prefabricated pieces ever entered the arsenal's inventory. This system removed the variability of on-the-spot craftsmanship. In a traditional shipyard, the quality of the hull could depend heavily on the specific mood or skill of the carpenters working that week. At the Arsenal, the quality was guaranteed by the process itself. The ships that emerged were predictably robust, each one as sound as the last. Naval records and reports from Venetian captains consistently praised the handling and resilience of their galleys, especially in comparison to those of other maritime powers. Ottoman or Genoese ships, often built in decentralized yards with less rigid standards, could be brilliant one-offs, but they lacked the uniform reliability of the Venetian fleet. This consistency became a tactical advantage. A squadron commander could plan maneuvers with confidence, knowing each of his ships would respond identically to the helm. In the chaos of a storm or the fury of battle, this reliability was priceless. The Arsenal's achievement was not choosing speed over quality, but engineering a system where supreme quality was the very prerequisite for speed. They mastered the art of preparation so completely that the final assembly could be both breathtakingly fast and unshakably solid. It was a testament to a profound understanding that true efficiency is not about cutting corners, but about eliminating every possible point of failure long before the moment of action arrives. The fortress of brick and water was also a fortress of silence. Within the Arsenal's towering walls, knowledge was guarded as fiercely as any treasure vault. The Republic understood that its revolutionary methods were not just a matter of pride, but a matter of survival. If a rival power could replicate their system of prefabrication and parallel assembly, Venice's greatest advantage would evaporate overnight. This was not about keeping a single invention secret. It was about protecting an entire industrial philosophy. Consequently, the Arsenal operated under a shroud of state-enforced secrecy so complete it became a world apart. Outsiders, especially foreign merchants or diplomats, were strictly forbidden from entering without explicit permission. Even Venetian citizens without official business were kept beyond the gates. The perimeter was constantly patrolled by guards, and watchtowers provided sweeping views of both the interior canals and the lagoon approaches, ensuring no curious eyes could peer in from a distance. This physical isolation was the first and most obvious layer of defense. turning the entire complex into a black box where raw materials entered and warships emerged, with the magical transformation inside remaining a mystery to the outside world. But the true security did not come from bricks and guards alone. It came from the culture instilled in the people who worked there. For the Arsenalotti, secrecy was not just a rule, it was a sacred oath, a core part of their identity and loyalty to the Serenissima. Disclosing any detail of the shipbuilding process, from the dimensions of a template to the formula for waterproofing pitch, was considered an act of high treason, punishable by severe consequences. This bond of silence was reinforced by the very privileges that bound them to the state, their guaranteed wages, their pensions, their social standing. They had everything to lose and nothing to gain by betrayal. Their closed community, living in the shadow of the walls they worked within, became a perfect echo chamber of protected knowledge. Skills were passed from father to son, from master to apprentice within the secure confines of the workshops, never written down in manuals that could be stolen or copied. The famed party tagliotti templates were among the most closely guarded objects in the Republic, stored under lock and key and handled only by senior masters. This culture created an almost impenetrable barrier. A spy might bribe a guard to glimpse the outer basin, but he could not bribe an entire guild, nor could he understand the decades of accumulated, tacit knowledge that made the assembly line flow. Venice extended this policy of secrecy to its entire supply chain. The state officials who managed the forests on the mainland, who contracted for hemp and iron, were instructed to obfuscate the true scale and purpose of their purchases. They might buy from multiple suppliers to disguise total quantities, or use intermediaries to hide the final destination of materials. The goal was to make it impossible for an outsider to piece together the full picture of what the arsenal was capable of producing and how quickly it could do so. This clandestine atmosphere did more than protect a technical edge. It cultivated a powerful psychological weapon, mystique. Stories of the arsenal's capabilities, of ships appearing as if by magic, spread throughout the Mediterranean ports, amplified by the very fact that no one could confirm the details. To rivals, the Venetian fleet seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to regenerate after losses or to materialize in unexpected strength. This uncertainty became a strategic deterrent in itself, giving Venetian diplomats a formidable bargaining chip and giving enemy admirals pause before committing to a conflict. The secrecy was not a side effect of their innovation, it was its necessary companion. In an age before patents, the only way to maintain a monopoly on a process was to build a wall of silence around it, and for centuries Venice proved masterful at this art. The silent, swift work behind those walls guaranteed that when the Republic spoke on the open sea, it did so with unquestioned authority. But no system, no matter how perfect, is immune to the relentless march of time. The very factors that made the arsenal a marvel of the medieval world began to work against it as a new age dawned. The 17th century brought a slow, quiet revolution in naval warfare, one that unfolded not in a single battle, but in the fundamental design of ships themselves. The sleek, oar-driven galley, the Gallia Sotile that the arsenal was built to produce by the dozen, was becoming obsolete. The future belonged to the sailing ship of the line, a vessel of an entirely different scale and logic. These were the galleys, and later the massive ships with rows of heavy cannon along their sides. They were floating fortresses, designed not for the rapid boarding actions of the Mediterranean, but for the artillery duels of the open Atlantic. They were built for endurance, not just speed, carrying supplies for voyages that lasted months, not weeks. This new paradigm was a problem the arsenal's brilliant system was never designed to solve. The genius of prefabrication and parallel assembly relied on standardization, on thousands of identical, interchangeable parts. A sailing ship of the line, however, was a unique engineering challenge. Its massive, curved hull was a complex structure that resisted the cookie-cutter approach. Its internal decks had to support the immense weight and recoil of broadside cannons, requiring a strength and customization that the old galley templates could not provide. The very architecture of the arsenal, with its covered docks designed for long, slender hulls, was ill-suited for these wider, deeper vessels. The state tried to adapt, of course. New basins were excavated, and attempts were made to apply the old principles to new designs. But the core truth was inescapable. The assembly line that could produce a galley in a day was not built to produce a single ship of the line in a year. The specialization that had been their greatest strength had become a profound liability. Their entire ecosystem, from the specialized guilds to the mainland timber contracts, was optimized for a product the world no longer wanted in such quantity. At the same moment, the economic foundation beneath Venice was shifting. New trade routes around Africa to the Indies bypassed the Mediterranean entirely, funneling wealth toward Atlantic powers like Portugal, Spain, and later England and the Netherlands. The spice and silk that had once flowed exclusively through Venetian warehouses now found other paths to Europe. The Republic's commercial dominance, the very source of the wealth that funded the arsenal, began a long, slow erosion. With trade profits declining, the state's finances grew strained. The immense, constant investment required to keep the arsenal's stockpiles full, and its workforce paid became a heavier and heavier burden. The Senate, facing these twin pressures of technological change and economic decline, made difficult choices. Investment in the grand old shipyard dwindled. Maintenance was deferred. The stockpiles of perfect pre-cut parts slowly diminished, not because they were used, but because they were no longer ordered. The Arsenalotti, once the proud engine of empire, found their work increasingly sporadic, their privileged status slowly fading into a memory. The great machine did not break down, it simply wound down, its rhythm slowing with each passing decade. What remained was a magnificent relic, a breathtaking monument to a way of thinking that had conquered its own time but could not leap into the next. The silent, swift work behind the walls gave way to a different kind of quiet, the stillness of a tool whose purpose had been outgrown by history. To truly grasp the scale of the Venetian achievement, we must step outside its fortified walls and look at how the rest of the maritime world built its fleets. The contrast could not be more stark. While Venice perfected a single, state-owned juggernaut, its great rival Genoa relied on a constellation of private shipyards scattered along its coastline. These family-run businesses, known as maestrans, were skilled and innovative, capable of producing excellent warships, but they operated on a fundamentally different logic: profit and individual contract. A Genoese yard built a ship when a buyer, whether the state or a wealthy merchant, commissioned one and provided the funds. There was no massive, permanent stockpile of pre-cut parts, no standing army of specialized state workers. Each vessel was essentially a custom project, its construction paced by the flow of capital and the availability of craftsmen, who might be working on multiple projects for different patrons. This meant mobilization in a crisis was a matter of frantic negotiation, not automatic execution. The Genoese state had to persuade or pressure private yards to prioritize its orders, often at premium prices, and then hope the materials and labor could be assembled in time. The result was a fleet of high-quality but disparate vessels, each with its own quirks, built at the speed of commerce, not the speed of command. Across the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire presented another formidable model, one of immense scale but different organization. The Ottomans established several major naval arsenals, most notably at the Golden Horn in Constantinople. These were state-run facilities, impressive in their own right, yet they often functioned more as vast coordination hubs than as integrated factories. The Ottoman system frequently relied on a form of compulsory labor, drafting skilled craftsmen from across their vast territories for temporary service. While this provided access to a huge pool of talent, it lacked the lifelong specialization and institutional loyalty of the Venetian Arsenalotti. Moreover, the supply chain for materials like timber, though extensive, was sometimes disrupted by the very size of the empire and the challenges of overland transport. An Ottoman arsenal could produce a staggering number of ships, but the process was more akin to mustering an army, a colossal gathering of resources and people for a campaign, rather than the constant, humming production of a dedicated machine. The system was magnificent and powerful, but it was not designed for the same kind of relentless, predictable throughput. Looking north to the emerging Atlantic powers like England or Portugal, the picture was again one of decentralization. Royal dockyards like those at Portsmouth or Deptford existed, but they were often just one part of a broader ecosystem that included numerous private contractors along riverbanks and estuaries. Building a navy for an ocean-going fleet was a monumental undertaking that required marshalling resources from across the kingdom, a process managed by the Royal Treasury and Navy boards through a web of contracts. This could produce legendary ships, but the timeline was measured in seasons or years, not days. The entire enterprise was reactive, scaling up in response to a specific threat or ambition, and then scaling down when the immediate need passed. There was no permanent, standing industrial plant operating at full capacity in peacetime, ready to surge at a moment's notice. What separates Venice from all these contemporaries is not merely the speed of a single ship, but the system behind it. The Arsenal was not just a bigger shipyard, it was a different kind of organism. It was a vertically integrated, state-capitalized, permanently staffed factory that treated naval power as a continuous product, not a periodic project. While others mastered the art of building a ship, Venice mastered the science of building shipbuilding itself, creating an engine that could produce naval power as reliably as a mill produces flour. This makes the Arsenal not merely an advanced medieval dockyard, but a clear precursor to the centralized factories of the industrial age. It stands as a brilliant, lonely anomaly, a glimpse of a future logic of production that would not become the global standard for centuries. Its true legacy is that it proved efficiency could be engineered on a state-wide scale, turning the slow, artisanal craft of shipbuilding into a relentless, repeatable process. That leap of imagination, from building vessels to building a system that builds vessels, is what forever marks the Venetian Arsenal as a revolution enclosed in brick and water. The principles forged in that lagoon-side fortress did not vanish with the last galley. They echo in the hum of every modern factory and the logic of every global supply chain. The Venetian Arsenal was not just building ships, it was building a blueprint for industrial organization that remains startlingly relevant. Its true invention was a system, a way of thinking about production that separated the act of creation from the moment of assembly. This is the profound lesson it leaves for our world, that breakthrough innovation is often less about a new gadget and more about a new way to organize people, materials, and time. Consider the concept we now call supply chain management. The Arsenal's officials were its early masters, orchestrating a flow of oak from the Dolomites, hemp from Bologna, and iron from the Alps with a precision that ensured the assembly line never waited. They managed lead times, secured strategic reserves, and mitigated risk through long-term contracts, all without a single digital spreadsheet. Their goal was the same as any modern logistics director: to have the right part in the right place at the right time. This foresight transformed uncertainty into a predictable input, turning the chaotic variables of nature and trade into a steady rhythm of production. Then there is the revolutionary idea of standardized, interchangeable parts, the parti tagliotti. This was the medieval route of mass production. By using templates to create identical components, they achieved a consistency that made every galley a known quantity. A modern automotive plant operates on the exact same principle. A car door stamped out in Michigan must fit perfectly on a frame assembled in Texas because both were made from the same digital blueprint. That leap from unique craftsmanship to repeatable precision is the foundational step for building anything at scale, whether it is a 16th century warship or a 21st century smartphone. The assembly line itself finds a clear ancestor in those covered Venetian docks. The Arsenal broke the monolithic task of shipbuilding into discrete, specialized stages, performed by different teams working in parallel. A hull being planked sat next to a hull being fitted with masts next to a hull being caulked. This parallel processing eliminated the dead time of sequential work. Centuries later, visionaries like Henry Ford would famously choreograph this same dance for automobiles, moving the product past stationary workers, each adding a specific piece. The goal was identical: to keep the valuable human labor constantly engaged, transforming a stream of parts into a stream of finished products with breathtaking speed. Even modern quality control has its roots in the watchful eyes of the Proveditore. By establishing and enforcing strict technical specifications, the state guaranteed that every component met a minimum standard of excellence before it ever reached the assembly basin. This shifted the burden of quality upstream into the preparation phase. Today, from aerospace to electronics, rigorous quality assurance protocols serve the same purpose: catching defects early in the process rather than at the final, costly moment of assembly. It is the understanding that quality cannot be inspected into a product, it must be built into it from the very beginning. Finally, the Arsenal's model of vertical integration, controlling everything from the forest to the foundry to the final fitting out, offers a powerful case study in strategic concentration. While not always the most flexible model, it provided unparalleled security and speed in a volatile world. We see echoes of this in certain national projects, where governments centralize critical industries for strategic autonomy, or in tech companies that design their own chips, software, and hardware to create a seamless, optimized product ecosystem. The lesson is about control over one's own destiny, about reducing dependency and friction in the chain of creation. Ultimately, the Arsenal's greatest legacy is a philosophical one. It demonstrated that monumental achievement is often a feat of logistics and human organization. The technology of the galley was important, but it was the system around it, the management of the supply chain, the standardization of parts, the choreography of labor, that enabled the legendary one-day ship. For any modern manager, engineer, or entrepreneur, the story is a timeless reminder. The next breakthrough may not lie in a brighter flash of technical genius, but in a quieter, more profound revolution in designing a better process. The quiet efficiency of those brick walls whispers that to build something extraordinary, you must first master the art of building the machine that builds it. The legend of the one-day ship is not a fable, but a story written in brick, wood, and paper. You can still walk its stage today in the quiet northern district of Castello. The Arsenal's iconic entrance, the Porta Magna, stands as a triumphant archway from the 15th century, its classical columns and stone lions a permanent declaration of the power that once flowed from within. Passing through it, you enter a vast, open space that feels more like a forgotten city square than a factory floor. The scale is the first truth that strikes you. The great covered docks, the Tazzoni, with their long, repeating brick arches, still stretch along the water's edge. You can stand inside the Tezon Grand and feel the immense, silent volume of it, a space built not for people, but for the simultaneous creation of giants. Along one side runs the Cordery, the rope walk, now repurposed but still an astonishing 300 meters long. Its sheer length is a physical argument, a testament to the industrial demand for miles of perfect cable. These are not ruins in the traditional sense. They are the preserved skeleton of the machine, their proportions alone confirming the scale of ambition described in the chronicles. But stone and timber only tell part of the story. The true heartbeat of the arsenal is recorded in Venice's immense state archives, a paper trail of breathtaking detail. The mariegole, the charters and rule books of the guilds, stipulate everything from the wages of a master caulker to the quality of oakum he must use. Senate decrees written in precise, urgent script order the procurement of 10,000 oars or command the immediate reinforcement of the fleet before the sailing season. Meticulous pay ledgers list the names of thousands of Arsenalotti, their salaries, and their absences, transforming anonymous workers into individuals with families and livelihoods. One document might detail the punishment for a sawyer whose planks were found to be half a finger too narrow, while another records the state's purchase of an entire forest in the Friuli region. This bureaucratic mountain does more than confirm the legend. It provides the granular texture of its reality. We learn not just that they built ships quickly, but how they managed to do it through contracts, inspections, and a relentless focus on standards. Modern archaeology has begun to read the soil and silt of the arsenal itself, adding a third layer of proof. Core samples taken from the basins reveal centuries of accumulated sediment mixed with wood shavings, metal fragments, and traces of organic materials like pitch and tar. These micro-layers act as a timeline of constant activity. Studies of the foundations show how the complex expanded, with new walls built directly over older canals, a physical map of its relentless growth. By mapping these findings against the historical documents, researchers can now estimate the true capacity of the facility at its peak, confirming that it could indeed house and service well over 100 galleys at once. This convergence of evidence is powerful. The architecture shows the stage, the archives provide the script and the roster of players, and the archaeology reveals the wear and tear of the performance itself. Together, they close the gap between story and history. They tell us that the accounts of standardized parts and coordinated assembly lines are not romantic exaggerations, but accurate descriptions of a system that was, for its time, almost unimaginably advanced. The wonder is not that they could do it, but that we can still trace the precise outlines of how they did, making the tangible reality of this medieval marvel as compelling as its most famous myth. The story of a galley built between sunrise and sunset asks us to separate the spark of legend from the steady flame of fact. It is a tale that invites a historian's careful eye. Could a complex warship truly be built from raw timber to finished vessel in a single working day? The practical knowledge of shipbuilding suggests a more nuanced, yet equally impressive, truth. The true miracle was not the final day of assembly, but the months of meticulous preparation that made such speed possible. Think of it like a master chef preparing a feast. The breathtaking speed of service when the guests arrive is only possible because the stocks have been simmering for hours, the vegetables are pre-chopped, and the sauces are already reduced to perfection. The final plating is swift, but it rests upon a foundation of invisible labor. So it was with the arsenal. The legendary one-day launch almost certainly refers to the final assembly and outfitting of a galley from a complete kit of pre-fabricated parts. Every rib, plank, and bench was already shaped, smoothed, and waiting. The caulking pitch was pre-mixed, the sails were folded in storage, and the oars were bundled in racks. On that day, the arsenal did not build a ship. It performed the final, breathtaking act of assembling one. This distinction does not diminish the feat. It reframes it as the ultimate expression of a system designed for exactly this kind of rapid deployment. The legend likely crystallizes around a specific, high-stakes moment. It could have been a demonstrative launch staged for a visiting dignitary to showcase Venetian power, a theatrical proof of concept. More plausibly, it was born from the frantic reality of a crisis mobilization. perhaps during the tense build-up to a conflict like the War of Chioggia or the preparations for Lepanto. In such a climate, with the Senate demanding immediate results, the arsenal would have shifted to its highest tempo, pulling a nearly complete hull from its covered dock and rushing it through final fitting and arming in a continuous day-long sprint. This was not a leisurely test, but the system operating at its wartime pulse. We have a compelling primary account from a man who witnessed Venetian power firsthand. Philippe de Comines, a French diplomat visiting Venice in the late 1400s, wrote of seeing the arsenal's capacity. He described a state of constant readiness with galleys in every stage of construction and noted that the facility could completely outfit a vessel at remarkable speed. His testimony does not explicitly mention a single day, but it paints a vivid picture of a system so advanced that such a claim would have been entirely believable to contemporaries. It is this atmosphere of awe, reported by observers like Comines, that allowed the one-day story to take root and flourish. It became the perfect symbol for a process that felt almost supernatural to outsiders. Viewing the achievement through this lens does not reduce it, but rather elevates it. The glory lies not in a single, miraculous stunt, but in the sustained, high-tempo production system that made the stunt conceivable. It was the culmination of 100 smaller innovations: the stockpiling discipline, the guild specialization, the architectural flow, all converging to create a machine that could compress the final act of creation into a single, sun-tracked span. The one-day ship was not magic, it was logistics performed at the level of legend. This understanding leads us to a deeper question, one that moves from admiring the machine to examining the human spirit within it. Beyond ledgers and launchings, the arsenal was also a theater of power, a spectacle designed to impress and intimidate. Its cultural resonance was as carefully crafted as its galleys. For the Venetian state, the shipyard was not merely a factory. It was a living monument, a physical argument for the Republic's superiority that was displayed to every important visitor. The awe it inspired became a form of soft power, weaving the facility into the very myth of Venice. One of the earliest and most famous literary testaments to this effect comes from the poet Dante Alighieri. During his exile from Florence, Dante visited Venice, and the sight of the arsenal left a profound mark. In Canto 21 of his Inferno, he describes the pitch boiling in the eighth circle of hell, and he reaches for a metaphor his readers would understand. He writes of the Venetian arsenal where a sticky tar is made to caulk the battered ships, and how in the winter the workmen cannot build new vessels, so instead they repair the old ones. The comparison is chilling, yet it reveals something crucial. By the early 1300s, the arsenal was already so famous, so synonymous with a very particular kind of industrial activity, that Dante could use it as a universal reference point for the damned. He assumed his readers across Italy would immediately grasp the image of that vast, bubbling, laborious place. This was not just a shipyard, it was a landmark of the European imagination. This fame was cultivated through orchestrated visits. Foreign princes, ambassadors, and cardinals were routinely given tours of the complex as part of their state welcome. Walking a dignitary past the covered docks where multiple hulls rose in unison, or through the endless rope walk where teams worked in silent synchrony, was a deliberate political strategy. It was a demonstration of latent power. The message was clear: you see our strength not just in the galleys we have afloat, but in the dozens more we can summon from this very basin in a matter of weeks. The visual and auditory spectacle was overwhelming. The rhythmic cacophony of thousands of mallets, the smell of pine pitch and sawdust, the sheer scale of the operation. These tours were designed to generate reports that would travel back to foreign courts, amplifying Venice's reputation for inexhaustible naval capacity. The state actively promoted this image through official art and print. Engravings and later paintings frequently depicted the arsenal's bustling interior, celebrating its order and productivity. These were not neutral documents, they were propaganda pieces, reinforcing the idea of a harmonious, efficient republic where every citizen contributed to the common good under the wise guidance of the Senate. The Arsenalotti themselves were often portrayed as heroic figures, strong and dedicated, the sturdy backbone of the state. Perhaps the most poignant cultural reflection is found in the work of Venetian artists like Canaletto and his followers in the 18th century. By this time, the arsenal's peak was past, but its symbolic power was undiminished. In their detailed vedute or view paintings, the complex is often shown from across the lagoon, its formidable walls and towers forming a majestic backdrop to the daily life of the city. It is presented not as an ugly industrial site, but as an integral, even beautiful part of the Venetian landscape, as essential to the city's identity as the Doge's Palace or the Basilica of San Marco. This artistic treatment signals a profound cultural absorption. The arsenal had transcended its function. It was no longer just where ships were built. It was a foundational pillar of what it meant to be Venetian. It represented resilience, collective effort, and technological mastery. It was proof that their city, built on water by human will, could defy nature and rival empires through intelligence and organization. The myth of the one-day ship was the perfect crystallization of this belief, a story that celebrated not just a product, but the entire unique system that produced it. This cultural footprint ensured that long after its forges cooled, the arsenal remained, and still remains, a powerful symbol. It stands as a testament to the moment a society realized that its greatest monument might not be a cathedral or a statue, but the humming, purposeful, awe-inspiring machine that guaranteed its freedom. This industrial might was fueled by a hunger that reshaped the landscape itself. To keep the arsenal's assembly lines humming, Venice needed a constant feast of timber, and its appetite for oak and fir was insatiable. The dense forests of the mainland, the terra firma, were not just a resource, they were a strategic battery that the Republic steadily drained. This voracious demand created one of history's first recorded environmental dilemmas, leading the Venetian state to become an unlikely pioneer in forest management. They realized that unchecked cutting was not just ecologically damaging, it was a direct threat to national security. A future without timber meant a future without a fleet, and thus no Venice at all. In response, the Senate passed a series of groundbreaking laws. They designated protected forest zones, particularly in the regions of Cadore and the Friuli, where the best shipbuilding oak grew. Cutting was strictly regulated, with permits required and quotas enforced by state officials known as provveditori alle legni, or supervisors of the woods. Perhaps most forward-thinking were the mandates for replanting. Landowners who harvested trees were often legally obligated to plant new ones, ensuring the resource would be available for future generations. This was not conservation for nature's sake, but a calculated, long-term investment in the Republic's survival. It represents a fascinating early chapter in sustainable resource policy, born entirely from pragmatic, militaristic necessity. Within the arsenal's walls, a different kind of resourcefulness prevailed, a meticulous culture of reuse. In an operation of that scale, waste was not just messy, it was inefficient, and inefficiency was a sin against the state. Every piece of scrap had potential value. Offcuts of oak and fir, too small for hull planks, were carefully sorted. Some were carved into the thousands of wooden pegs or tree nails used to fasten the ships together. Others became blocks for pulleys, tool handles, or were bundled for fuel in the forges and pitch boilers. Sawdust and shavings were collected, often used as packing material or as a base for walkways. Metal was far too precious to waste. Old iron nails pulled from decommissioned ships were gathered, melted down in the foundries, and reforged into new nails, anchors, or weapon parts. The recycling of bronze from old cannons into new ones was standard practice. Even the sticky byproducts of shipbuilding had a second life. The hardened dregs of pitch and tar, scraped from caulking pots, could be reheated and reused for less critical sealing tasks. This relentless cycle of reclamation was driven by more than thrift. It was a logistical imperative. Importing materials was expensive and vulnerable to disruption, so maximizing every gram of what they already had within the walls made the entire system more resilient and self-contained. Yet, despite these efforts, the operation's environmental footprint was undeniably vast and left lasting marks. The controlled disposal of industrial byproducts, like the sludge from the gunpowder mills or the waste from the foundries, posed a constant challenge. While some waste was repurposed, other materials inevitably found their way into the surrounding lagoon waters, subtly altering the local ecosystem over centuries. The story of the Arsenal's ecology is one of stark contrasts between the foresight of managed forests and the inevitable toll of concentrated industry. It shows a society capable of remarkable long-term planning for the resources it understood as vital, while remaining largely blind to the subtler, cumulative costs of its own monumental productivity. This tension between brilliant management and unintended consequence would become a quiet, slow-moving counterpoint to the Arsenal's celebrated speed, a reminder that even the most perfect human machine operates within the limits of the natural world it draws upon. The Arsenal's perfect system cast a long shadow, one measured in aching muscles and the relentless rhythm of the oar. For every skilled Arsenalotto enjoying state privilege, there existed another tier of labor, one that powered the ships but shared little in their glory. The sleek galleys that emerged from the basin were engines of speed, and their primary fuel was human strength. The men who provided it were the Gallotti, the rowers. While some were free Venetian citizens serving for wages, a significant portion were drawn from a far grimmer pool: prisoners of war, convicted criminals, or enslaved individuals purchased from markets around the Mediterranean. Their world was the narrow bench, the worn handle of an oar, and the unforgiving count of the comito, the rowing master whose drumbeat dictated their existence. The physical reality was brutal. Imagine the confines of the galley itself, a space where 200 men lived, ate, and slept at their posts for weeks or months. There was no privacy, only the constant press of bodies, the shared stench of sweat, brine, and the bilge water sloshing beneath the deck. The work was a marathon of coordinated pain. A full battle speed, the alla sensile stroke, demanded explosive, exhausting effort. Shoulders and backs were perpetually strained. Hands became masses of callus and blisters that would break and bleed. In summer, the sun beat down on the exposed deck. In winter, icy spray soaked them to the bone. This was not a job, it was a sentence, a form of living machinery essential to the Republic's reach but invisible in its celebrated narratives. Even within the Arsenal's walls, the environment was far from gentle. The air was thick with sensory assault. The deafening, percussive din of 1,000 mallets striking wood and iron created a constant roar that must have left ears ringing for a lifetime. The smell was a pungent cocktail of fresh sawdust, the acrid tang of hot metal from the forges, and the overwhelming, throat-catching odor of boiling pine pitch used for caulk. This sticky, black substance was not just smelly, it was dangerous, splashing on skin and causing severe burns. Workdays were long, governed by the sun and the urgent demands of the Senate's production quotas. While the Arsenalotti had guild protections, the pressure to maintain the miraculous output was immense, flowing down through foremen to every carpenter, caulker, and laborer. A delay or flaw was not just a personal failure, it was a potential crack in the Republic's armor. This reflection adds a necessary depth to our understanding. The Arsenal's brilliance in logistics and organization was inseparable from the social hierarchy it reinforced. It was a pyramid with the state and its patrician rulers at the peak, the skilled, loyal Arsenalotti forming a privileged core, and a vast base of coerced or desperate labor supporting it all. The marvel of a ship built in a day was made possible not only by pre-cut timber, but by preordained social roles. To admire the achievement is to also acknowledge its foundation. It reminds us that historical progress, especially of such a concentrated and monumental kind, is rarely a simple story of human triumph. It is often a complex tapestry woven with threads of genius and coercion, of community privilege and individual hardship. The silent efficiency of the assembly line was underpinned by the silent endurance of thousands whose names are lost to the ledgers, a sobering layer to the Arsenal's otherwise dazzling legacy. Could we, with all our modern knowledge, actually do it? Could a team of historians and craftsmen, using only period tools and techniques, assemble a complete Venetian galley in a single day? It is a captivating thought experiment that forces us to measure our romantic admiration against tangible skill. Modern attempts to reconstruct historical ships offer a sobering point of comparison. In Greece and Italy, projects to build replicas of ancient triremes and medieval galleys are celebrated achievements of experimental archaeology. These endeavors, like the famous Olympia's trireme reconstruction, are marvels in their own right. Yet their timelines are revealing. They are measured not in hours but in years. A single such project involves decades of scholarly debate over hull shapes, followed by years of sourcing appropriate timber, training craftsmen in forgotten methods, and then the painstaking, sequential construction. Every step is a rediscovery, a struggle against the erosion of practical knowledge. The sheer coordination of these projects, impressive as they are, operates at the pace of careful scholarship, not the urgent tempo of wartime production. This gap in velocity points directly to what we have truly lost. It is not merely the blueprints for a galley, which we can deduce from wrecks and manuscripts. What is missing is the living, breathing ecosystem of the arsenal. We lack the army of specialists who spent their entire lives mastering one hyper-focused task, their hands knowing the exact feel of a perfectly shaped plank. We have lost the ingrained, unspoken communication between the sawyer, the caulker, and the rope maker, the seamless flow that allowed work to ripple across a basin in parallel rather than in a slow, single file. Our modern reconstructions are brilliant puzzles solved by a small, dedicated team. The Arsenal was a perpetual motion machine operated by a synchronized city. Even if we could gather the materials and the tools, replicating the human engine, the instant, wordless understanding between thousands of workers, presents a challenge of social engineering we are no longer trained to meet. This thought experiment does not diminish these modern projects, it elevates the historical one. It shows that the Arsenal's legendary speed was not just about having the parts ready. It was about having the people ready, their knowledge so deeply internalized that it became reflex, their coordination so practiced it resembled instinct. From our contemporary vantage point, where complex projects are managed with software and long lead times, this invisible layer of human synchronization seems almost more miraculous than the ship itself. It suggests that the greatest artifact the Arsenal produced may not have been the galley that sailed away at sunset, but the silent, flawless understanding that built it by noon. The Venetian Arsenal stands as a breathtaking testament to human ingenuity, a medieval preview of the Industrial Revolution that secured an empire's destiny. We have navigated its innovative assembly lines, met its dedicated workforce, and unraveled the logistics behind its legendary speed. From the forest to the foundry to the final launch, this was a system that understood a profound truth, that to build something extraordinary, you must first master the art of building the machine that builds it. Their genius was not a single invention, but a complete reimagining of process. turning the chaotic craft of shipbuilding into a predictable, repeatable science. The true legacy of the Arsenal, then, is not just in the wooden hulls that patrolled the Mediterranean, but in its enduring proof that visionary organization can achieve the seemingly impossible. It whispers to us across the centuries that our greatest challenges are often solved not by a louder effort, but by a smarter system. As we reflect on this chapter, consider what modern arsenals we are building today. What are the systems we are designing, the supply chains we are weaving, the specialized knowledge we are cultivating that will define our own legacy? The story of Venice's floating fortress reminds us that the future belongs not just to those with powerful tools, but to those who possess the even more powerful blueprint for using them. If this journey into the engine room of history resonated with you, we would love to hear your thoughts. What parallels do you see between this medieval marvel and the world around us today? Share your reflections below and subscribe to continue exploring the hidden wonders and pivotal turns that have shaped our world. The tides of history are full of such stories waiting to be discovered.